The afternoon sun filtered through the crystal chandeliers of the Grand Palazzo Hotel, casting dancing prisms of light across the marble floors and gilded walls. Isabella Romano sat alone at a corner table in the hotel's elegant tea room, her slender fingers wrapped around a delicate porcelain cup filled with Earl Grey. This had become her Wednesday ritual over the past 3 months, a small luxury she allowed herself amid the chaos of running her struggling café in the heart of the city. The tea room was a sanctuary, a place where she could pretend, if only for an hour, that her world wasn't slowly crumbling around her. At 28 years old, Isabella had poured everything she had into Romano's café, the small coffee shop her late mother had dreamed of opening but never lived to see. For 5 years, Isabella had made that dream a reality, serving the neighborhood with homemade pastries, artisan coffee, and the kind of warm hospitality that turned strangers into regulars. But the past year had been brutal. A corporate coffee chain had opened 2 blocks away, her landlord had doubled the rent, and her savings had dwindled to almost nothing. Still, Isabella refused to give up. Giving up would mean letting go of the last connection she had to her mother, and that was something she simply couldn't do. She took a sip of her tea, savoring the bergamot flavor, and allowed herself a moment of peace. The tea room was moderately busy for a Wednesday afternoon. Well-dressed businessmen conducted quiet meetings, elegant women chatted over petits fours, and a few tourists snapped discreet photographs of the opulent surroundings. Isabella had just opened her book, a romance novel she'd been meaning to finish for weeks, when a commotion at a nearby table shattered the tranquil atmosphere. An elderly woman, perhaps in her early 70s, had collapsed against her chair, her face pale and her breathing labored. The woman's companion, a younger man who appeared to be hotel staff, looked panicked and uncertain. Without hesitation, Isabella abandoned her tea and rushed to the woman's side, her nursing training from college, before she'd switched to culinary school, kicking in automatically. "Call an ambulance," Isabella instructed the staff member firmly as she knelt beside the woman, checking her pulse and airway. The woman's pulse was rapid but steady, and after a moment her eyes fluttered open, dark and surprisingly sharp despite her evident distress. "No ambulance," the woman whispered in heavily accented English, her voice surprisingly strong for someone who had just collapsed. Her hand, weathered but adorned with expensive rings, gripped Isabella's wrist with unexpected strength. "Please, no ambulance. My son, he's meeting with dangerous men. They cannot know I am weak. They will see it as his weakness." Isabella's brow furrowed with concern. "Ma'am, you need medical attention. You could be having a heart episode." "I know my body, child," the woman insisted, her dark eyes boring into Isabella's with an intensity that was almost hypnotic. "This is my blood pressure, nothing more. It happens when I am stressed. But listen to me carefully, my son is in a meeting just outside on the terrace. Very dangerous men who would hurt him if they sensed any vulnerability in our family. I need you to do something for me, something strange, but I beg you." "What do you need?" Isabella asked, already reaching for her phone to call for help despite the woman's protests. "Pretend you are my son's fiancée," the woman said urgently, her grip tightening on Isabella's wrist. "Just for 1 hour. Just until this meeting is over. These men, they respect family, tradition, strength. If they see my son has a woman, a future, stability, they will negotiate fairly. But if they learn I am ill, they will see weakness and my Dante will be in danger. Please, I see kindness in your eyes. Help an old woman protect her son." Before Isabella could process this bizarre request or formulate a response, the terrace doors burst open, and 3 men strode into the tea room with the kind of presence that made everyone instinctively step back. The man in the center was impossible not to notice. He stood at least 6'3", with broad shoulders that filled out his impeccably tailored charcoal suit. His hair was dark, almost black, swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble, sharp jawline, high cheekbones, and eyes the color of espresso that swept the room with predatory awareness before landing on the elderly woman. "Mama?" His voice was deep, commanding, and laced with barely contained alarm as he crossed the room in 3 long strides, the other men flanking him like shadows. "What happened?" "Someone call a doctor immediately." "Dante, no," the elderly woman, his mother clearly, said with remarkable composure, pushing herself up straighter in her chair with Isabella's help. "I simply stood up too quickly and felt dizzy. Your fiancé was kind enough to help me sit back down. Isabella dear, tell him I'm fine." The moment hung suspended in time as Dante's dark eyes shifted to Isabella, really seeing her for the first time. His gaze was intense, analytical, taking in every detail of her appearance in a single sweeping glance. Isabella felt her breath catch, not from fear exactly, but from the sheer force of his presence. He was handsome in a dangerous way, like a blade wrapped in expensive silk, and she could sense the violence that lurked beneath his civilized exterior. But it was the confusion in his eyes that gave him away. He had no idea who she was. This woman was not his fiancée. Yet, as his gaze flickered between his mother's pleading eyes and the two men who had followed him in, one older, with graying hair and cold eyes, the other younger but equally menacing, Isabella watched understanding dawn across his features. His mother had created a fiction, and he had a split second to decide whether to play along or expose her lie. "Isabella," Dante said smoothly, his voice warming by several degrees as he extended his hand to help her stand. "Thank you for taking care of Mama. I told you she gets dizzy sometimes, didn't I?" His hand was warm, his grip firm but gentle, and there was a silent plea in his eyes that Isabella found impossible to ignore. The elderly woman, Maria Moretti, as Isabella would soon learn, had been right about one thing. There was kindness in Isabella's heart, perhaps too much for her own good. She couldn't abandon a sick woman or leave her son vulnerable to whatever dangers these cold-eyed men represented. Against every instinct of self-preservation, Isabella found herself nodding, allowing Dante to draw her close to his side. "Your mother was just showing me pictures of the house," Isabella heard herself say, the lie sliding from her lips with surprising ease. "She was telling me about the garden where we'll have the wedding reception." The older man with gray hair, Marco Salvatore, she would later discover, stepped forward, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Dante, you didn't mention you were engaged. How long has this been going on?" 6 months, Dante replied without hesitation, his arms sliding around Isabella's waist in a gesture that appeared natural but felt charged with tension. "We've been keeping it quiet. Isabella values her privacy, and I wanted to wait until the right moment to make announcements. You understand, Marco, in our world, family matters require discretion." Marco's eyes narrowed as he studied Isabella with the thoroughness of a jeweler examining a potentially fake diamond. 6 months is quite a long time to keep such a secret. "Tell me, Isabella, how did you meet Dante?" Isabella's mind raced, but before panic could set in, she felt Dante's hand tighten almost imperceptibly at her waist. A warning, a request, a lifeline. She thought of her mother, of how Maria Romano had taught her to face bullies with grace and confidence. She straightened her spine and met Marco's gaze directly. "At my café," she said, grateful that at least this part could contain truth. "He came in one morning, ordered an espresso, and complained that it was too bitter. I told him he clearly didn't understand good coffee. He came back the next day to argue with me about it, and the day after that, and the day after that. Eventually, he stopped complaining about the coffee and started asking me about myself." A slight smile tugged at the corner of Dante's mouth, the first genuine expression she'd seen cross his face. "She's right. I did complain about the coffee. It was terrible." "It was perfect," Isabella countered, falling into the rhythm of their fictional relationship with surprising ease. "You just have no appreciation for proper extraction." Marco laughed, but the sound held no warmth. "A woman who stands up to Dante Moretti. That's either very brave or very foolish. Perhaps both." He turned his attention back to Dante. "Shall we finish our discussion on the terrace? I believe we were close to reaching an agreement before your mother's dizzy spell." Dante's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course. Isabella, would you stay with Mama? Make sure she has some water and rests." "Naturally," Isabella replied, settling back into the chair beside Maria, who had been watching the entire exchange with sharp, calculating eyes that belied her earlier weakness. As the men retreated to the terrace, Dante casting one last unreadable glance over his shoulder at Isabella, Maria reached out and grasped Isabella's hand with surprising strength. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea what you've just done for my son. Marco Salvatore is a snake, and he was looking for any excuse to challenge Dante's position. A sick mother would have been all the weakness he needed." "What kind of business are they in?" Isabella asked, though part of her already knew the answer. The expensive suits, the dangerous edge, the talk of position, and challenges. It all pointed to one conclusion. "The kind where weakness gets you killed," Maria said bluntly. "My Dante, he's trying to change things, make the family legitimate, but men like Marco want to keep the old ways. Blood and violence, that's all they understand." She studied Isabella's face carefully. "You're not running away. Most women would be." "I'm still processing," Isabella admitted. "And your son is still on that terrace with those men. I can't exactly leave you alone until I know you're truly okay." Maria's expression softened. "You're a good girl. What did you say your name was?" "Isabella?" Isabella Romano. Romano, Maria repeated thoughtfully. Italian heritage? My mother's family was from Sicily. My father is Irish. Ah, a passionate combination. Maria smiled, then winced slightly, her hand going to her chest. Alarm flooded through Isabella. Mrs. Moretti, please, let me call for medical help. Whatever is happening out on that terrace, your health is more important. Call me Maria, dear. And I'll be fine. I have my pills in my purse. I just forgot to take them this morning. Too much stress, too much worry about Dante. She reached into her designer handbag and retrieved a prescription bottle, taking one of the tablets with the water a hovering waiter had brought. You see? Already I feel better. But Isabella wasn't convinced. Maria's color was still poor, and her breathing seemed labored. How long have you been having these episodes? A few months. The doctors say my heart is weak, that I need surgery, but I keep delaying. Dante has so much to worry about already. He doesn't need his mother's health problems added to his burdens. I'm sure he'd rather have a living mother who had surgery than lose you because you were too stubborn to get help, Isabella said firmly, her nursing instincts overriding any hesitation about speaking bluntly to a stranger. Maria studied her with those sharp dark eyes, and slowly, a smile spread across her lined face. You really would make a good daughter-in-law, you know? You have spirit. Dante needs a woman with spirit, not one of those vapid society girls his business associates keep pushing at him. Before Isabella could respond to that unsettling observation, the terrace doors opened again and the men returned. Dante's expression was carefully neutral, but Isabella noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand flexed at his side as if resisting the urge to form a fist. Marco, conversely, looked pleased with himself, like a cat who'd gotten into the cream. Well, Mrs. Moretti, Marco said, approaching their table with predatory grace, I'm glad to see you're feeling better. And Isabella, it was a pleasure to meet you. I'm sure we'll be seeing much more of each other soon. After all, if you're to be part of Dante's life, you'll need to attend our family gatherings. The way he said family made it clear he wasn't talking about simple dinner parties. I look forward to it, Isabella lied smoothly, rising from her chair as Dante moved to her side. After Marco and his associate finally left, the tension didn't dissipate. If anything, it intensified. Dante helped his mother to her feet with infinite gentleness, but when he turned to Isabella, his expression was guarded, unreadable. We need to talk, he said quietly. Privately. Can you spare another hour? Isabella thought of her café, where her best friend Sophia was managing the evening shift. She thought of the unpaid bills stacked on her desk, the threatening letter from her landlord giving her 60 days to vacate if she couldn't come up with 3 months back rent. She thought of the sensible thing to do, which would be to apologize for the confusion, wish them well, and return to her normal, complicated, but relatively safe life. Yes, she heard herself say instead. I can spare an hour. They relocated to a private suite in the hotel. Apparently, Dante kept one permanently reserved, and the moment the door closed behind them, he turned to his mother with barely contained frustration. Mama, what were you thinking? You could have gotten hurt, gotten Isabella hurt, gotten all of us killed if Marco had seen through the deception. But he didn't, Maria said calmly, settling onto a plush sofa with a sigh of relief. And now he thinks you have stability, a future wife, a reason to be cautious and measured. It bought you exactly what you needed, his agreement to the new territory divisions without violence. Dante dragged a hand through his dark hair, and for a moment, Isabella saw past the powerful Mafia boss to the worried son beneath. At what cost? Now we have to maintain this fiction or Marco will know we lied, and that will be even worse than the original weakness he was looking for. Then we maintain it, Maria said simply. For a few months until things settle down, until my surgery is done and I'm recovered. Is that really so terrible, having a beautiful, kind woman pretend to be engaged to you? Mama? Dante's voice held exasperation and affection in equal measure. Then he turned to Isabella, and his expression shifted to something more professional, more guarded. I apologize for dragging you into this. My mother has a tendency to act first and consider consequences later. I'll compensate you for your time today, and we'll figure out a way to quietly end this engagement that won't raise suspicions. Isabella should have agreed. Should have taken whatever money he offered and walked away from this dangerous world of mafia politics and deadly games. But something stopped her. Perhaps it was the desperation she'd seen in Maria's eyes, or the way Dante's shoulders seemed to carry the weight of impossible responsibilities, or maybe it was just her own desperate circumstances making her reckless. How much? She asked. Dante blinked, surprised. I'm sorry? How much would you pay me to continue this pretense? Isabella clarified, her heart pounding. Your mother is right. If Marco finds out you lied, it will be worse than if this had never happened. And she needs surgery, which means stress is dangerous for her. What if we continued the engagement just for a few months, just until your business situation stabilizes and your mother recovers? Absolutely not, Dante said immediately. You have no idea what you'd be getting into. This world, these people, they're dangerous. Marco isn't the only threat. There are others who would use you against me, hurt you to get to me. I won't put a civilian in that position. I'm not asking you to put me in danger, Isabella countered, her mind racing through the possibilities. I'm offering you a business arrangement. You need a fiancé to maintain stability and keep your mother's spirits up during her recovery. I need. She hesitated, pride warring with desperation. I need help saving my café. My landlord is demanding 3 months back rent plus the new increased rate, or I'm out in 60 days. That's $45,000. You pay that plus a weekly fee for my time, say $5,000 a week for 6 months, and I'll be your fiancé in public. We attend whatever events necessary, I visit your mother, I make it look real. When 6 months are up and your mother is recovered, we have a quiet, amicable split. No one gets hurt, everyone gets what they need. The silence that followed was deafening. Maria looked between them with barely concealed delight, while Dante's expression cycled through disbelief, consideration, and something that might have been admiration. You're serious, he finally said. You'd actually agree to this. I'm a businesswoman, Mr. Moretti. You need something I can provide, and you're in a position to solve my most pressing problem. That's the basis of any good negotiation. Isabella kept her voice steady despite her racing heart. Besides, your mother was kind to me today and I can see she's genuinely ill. I lost my mother 3 years ago. If I can help keep someone else's mother alive and reduce her stress during a dangerous surgery, that seems like the right thing to do. Dante studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face for any sign of deception or ulterior motive. Finally he turned to his mother. Mama, can you give us a moment? Maria rose gracefully, pausing to kiss Isabella's cheek. You're a blessing, child. Whether my stubborn son admits it or not. She retreated to one of the suite's bedrooms, closing the door behind her. Once they were alone, Dante's demeanor shifted. He moved closer, and Isabella was struck again by his sheer physical presence. The controlled power in his movements, the intensity of his focus when he looked at her. Before we go any further, you need to understand exactly what you'd be agreeing to. I'm not a good man, Isabella. I've done things, terrible things, to protect my family and our interests. The Moretti family has been involved in organized crime for 3 generations. I'm trying to change that, move us into legitimate business, but that transition has made us vulnerable to people like Marco who profit from the old ways. I understand, Isabella said, though she wasn't entirely sure she did. No, you don't, Dante said bluntly. But you will. If you agree to this, you'll move into the family estate. It's not negotiable. My fiancé wouldn't live separately, and it's the only way I can guarantee your safety. You'll have your own wing, your privacy, but you'll be under constant protection. Vincent Caruso, my second-in-command, will be assigned to you, along with 2 other guards. You'll need to learn about the family, our history, our traditions so you can answer questions convincingly. And there will be public events, charity galas, family dinners, social gatherings, where you'll need to play the role perfectly. I can do that, Isabella said with more confidence than she felt. Can you? Dante challenged. Can you smile and make small talk with men you know are criminals? Can you accept that the money paying for your café comes from morally questionable sources? Can you lie to your friends, your family, everyone you know about where you're living and why? Isabella met his gaze steadily. I can do whatever I need to do to save my mother's legacy. And if that means spending 6 months in a world I don't fully understand, then yes, I can do it. The question is, can you trust me not to betray you or put your family at risk? Something flickered in Dante's eyes, surprise perhaps, or the beginning of respect. My mother likes you. Maria Moretti is an excellent judge of character. If she trusts you, that's worth something. He was quiet for a moment, considering. All right. We'll draw up a contract. 6 months, starting today. I'll pay your cafe debts immediately and deposit $50,000 into an account for you that covers the weekly fees with a bonus for the inconvenience and risk. But there will be rules. Such as no contact with anyone outside approved channels that could compromise the operation. That means no posting on social media about your location or activities, no telling anyone, and I mean anyone, the truth about our arrangement except your cafe manager, who'll need to know why you're suddenly absent. You'll attend all required events and family functions. You'll be respectful to my mother and our family traditions. And most importantly, if at any point you feel unsafe or want out, you tell me immediately. I won't hold you to the contract if the situation becomes dangerous. Isabella considered his terms. They were reasonable, all things considered, if you ignored the fundamental insanity of the entire situation. I have one condition of my own. Dante raised an eyebrow. Go on. Your mother gets the surgery she needs as soon as possible, and I want to be kept informed of her condition. If I'm doing this partly to keep her stress levels down and help her recovery, then I need to know she's actually getting proper medical care. For the first time since they'd met, Dante smiled. A real smile that transformed his severe features into something approaching warmth. Agreed. She's been putting it off, using my situation as an excuse. Maybe having a fiancé who's concerned about her health will finally convince her to stop being stubborn. He extended his hand, and Isabella took it, sealing their bizarre agreement with a handshake that felt far more binding than any contract. His hand was warm, his grip firm, and for just a moment, Isabella wondered what she'd gotten herself into. Welcome to the family, fiancé, Dante said, a hint of dark humor in his voice. I hope you don't regret this. As Isabella gathered her things to leave and make arrangements for this dramatic change in her life, she caught sight of herself in one of the suite's ornate mirrors. She looked the same auburn hair falling in waves past her shoulders, same green eyes, same simple dress she'd worn to her quiet Wednesday tea. But everything had changed in the span of 2 hours. She thought of her café, of the bills she could finally pay, of keeping her mother's dream alive for at least another 6 months. She thought of Maria's grateful smile and Dante's complicated mix of danger and duty. And she thought of Marco Salvatore's cold eyes and the very real threat he represented. What had she agreed to? A temporary arrangement with clear terms and boundaries. 6 months of pretending, of playing a role, of helping a family while saving her own livelihood. It was practical. It was sensible in its own twisted way. It was also the beginning of something Isabella couldn't possibly have anticipated. A journey that would take her from that elegant tea room into a world of shadows and secrets, where the line between pretense and reality would blur, and where her carefully planned 6-month arrangement would become something far more dangerous and real than she could have imagined. But that afternoon, as she left the Grand Palazzo Hotel and returned to her café to tell Sofia about the opportunity that had fallen into her lap, Isabella Romano believed she was in control. She believed this was just business. She had no idea how wrong she was. The Moretti estate sprawled across 15 acres of prime real estate on the outskirts of the city, hidden behind stone walls and iron gates that spoke of old money and older secrets. Isabella arrived 3 days after her agreement with Dante, her few belongings packed in 2 suitcases that looked almost comically inadequate as a uniformed driver carried them through the mansion's massive front doors. The house itself was a stunning example of Italian Renaissance architecture. All stone columns and arched windows, formal gardens and marble fountains. It was beautiful and intimidating in equal measure, much like its owner. Dante met her in the grand foyer, looking somehow more imposing in casual clothes than he had in his tailored suit. Dark jeans and a simple black shirt should have made him seem more approachable, but instead, they only emphasized his athletic build and the coiled tension in his movements. Welcome, he said, his tone formal but not cold. I'll show you to your quarters. We can discuss the details of our arrangement after you've settled in. Isabella's wing turned out to be a 6-room suite on the mansion's 2nd floor, with a bedroom larger than her entire apartment, a sitting room, a private bathroom with a tub that could have doubled as a swimming pool, and even a small office space. The decor was elegant but impersonal, all cream colors and expensive furniture that no one had actually lived with. It felt more like a luxury hotel than a home. Maria wanted to add some personal touches, but I told her to wait and see what you liked, Dante explained, watching her reaction carefully. Consider this your space. You can redecorate however you want. There's an interior designer on staff if you need help, or you can handle it yourself. It's lovely, Isabella said, which was true, even if it didn't feel remotely like hers. Thank you. Vincent will be by shortly to discuss security protocols, Dante continued. He's going to have concerns about this arrangement, and I need you to take his warnings seriously. Vince has kept me alive for the past 10 years. If he tells you something is dangerous or off limits, you listen. Understood. Understood, Isabella replied, setting her purse down on the pristine white sofa. When do I meet your mother again? Something softened in Dante's expression. She's resting now, but she'll want to see you for dinner tonight. Fair warning, she's already planning the wedding. I've tried to tell her this is temporary, but she's chosen to interpret that as me being pessimistic about your relationship rather than us having an actual end date to the contract. Isabella couldn't help but smile at that. She seems like a determined woman. That's one word for it, Dante said dryly. Stubborn, manipulative, and meddling are others. But she means well, and right now she's happier than I've seen her in years. So thank you for that. He moved toward the door, then paused. Isabella, I want to be clear about something. What you're doing for my family, for my mother, it matters. But if at any point this becomes too much, if you want out, you tell me. The money I've already transferred to your account is yours regardless. You're not trapped here. Before Isabella could respond, he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. She stood in the center of her palatial new temporary home and wondered, not for the first time, if she'd made a terrible mistake. The next 6 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity that left Isabella's head spinning. Vincent Caruso turned out to be a bear of a man in his mid-40s, with graying hair, sharp eyes, and a permanent expression of skepticism that seemed to deepen every time he looked at Isabella. Their first meeting had been tense. So you're the girl who's going to pretend to be in love with Dante for 6 months? Vince had said without preamble, his arms crossed as he studied her like a particularly unconvincing piece of evidence. You understand that if Marco or any of the other families figure out this is fake, it won't just be Dante who pays the price, right? You'll be seen as a co-conspirator, a liar, someone who helped the Morettis deceive the other families. That kind of insult gets people killed. I understand the stakes, Isabella had replied, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. That's why I intend to be very convincing. Convincing requires knowledge, Vince countered. You're a cafe owner from downtown. You know nothing about our world, our customs, our history. How are you going to handle questions about Dante's business? About the family's operations? About what it means to be a Moretti wife? Then teach me, Isabella challenged. You clearly think I'm going to fail, so help me succeed. Dante said you're his most trusted advisor. That means you know everything I need to know. So teach me. Something had shifted in Vince's expression then, surprise, maybe even a grudging hint of respect. All right, he'd said after a long moment. But we do this my way. You study, you learn, you practice until I believe you can pull this off. Otherwise, I'm advising Dante to end this arrangement before it gets us all killed. Thus began Isabella's immersion in the world of the Moretti family and organized crime. Every morning, Vince appeared at her door at precisely 7 o'clock with thick folders of information. Family trees going back 3 generations, territory maps, details of allied and rival families, the complex web of business interests both legitimate and otherwise. Isabella studied like she was preparing for the most important exam of her life, memorizing names and relationships, learning the unspoken rules and traditions that governed this hidden world. Maria proved to be an enthusiastic, if sometimes exhausting, teacher in the social aspects of Isabella's new role. Twice a week, they had tea together in Maria's private sitting room, where the older woman shared stories of her life as a Mafia wife, the challenges she'd faced, the strength required to maintain grace and dignity while your husband, and later your son, dealt in violence and danger. The key, Maria explained during one of their sessions, is understanding that we are the civilizing force. The men, they handle the business, the territories, the conflicts. We handle the family, the traditions, the appearances that keep society from seeing us as mere criminals. A Moretti wife is educated, cultured, charitable. She hosts the perfect dinner party, sits on the boards of respectable charities, and ensures that the family name carries weight in legitimate circles. Isabella absorbed it all, sometimes feeling like she was learning to navigate a foreign country without a map. But slowly, gradually, things began to click into place. She learned which families commanded respect and which were considered beneath notice. She learned the difference between made men and associates, between the old guard who clung to violent traditions and the new generation trying to legitimize their operations. She learned that Dante's vision for the family's future had made him powerful allies and dangerous enemies. And through it all, she learned about Dante himself. He was, Isabella discovered, a study in contradictions. In public, at the charity galas and family gatherings they attended together, he was charming, controlled, every inch the successful businessman and devoted fiancé. His hand at the small of her back felt natural, his whispered comments in her ear during boring speeches made her genuinely laugh, and when he introduced her to associates and rivals alike, there was a note of pride in his voice that seemed almost real. But in private he maintained careful distance. Their conversations were cordial but brief, focused on logistics and upcoming events. He never touched her unless someone was watching. He never stayed in her wing of the mansion longer than necessary. It was as if he was determined to keep their arrangement purely transactional, to maintain a wall between the role they played in public and the reality of their situation. Isabella told herself she appreciated his professionalism. This was a business arrangement after all. She was being paid to play a part, not to develop actual feelings for her temporary fiancé. The fact that Dante was attractive, intelligent, and showed surprising tenderness with his mother was irrelevant. The fact that she sometimes caught herself looking forward to their public appearances, enjoying the warmth of his hand in hers and the sound of his rare, genuine laughter, meant nothing. She was just getting good at playing the role. That was all. The first major test of Isabella's performance came 6 weeks into their arrangement at a charity gala benefiting children's hospitals. It was held at the city's most prestigious hotel, and everyone who was anyone in both legitimate society and the criminal underworld would be in attendance. Dante had warned her that Marco Salvatore would be there with his wife, along with representatives from at least 4 other major families. "This is when they'll really scrutinize you," Dante had said as they prepared for the event. "Marco's had time to dig into your background, look for inconsistencies in our story. He'll be watching for any sign that this engagement isn't real." Isabella had chosen her dress carefully, an elegant emerald green gown that brought out her eyes, sophisticated without being overly flashy. When she emerged from her room that evening, she found Dante waiting at the bottom of the stairs, impeccable in a tuxedo that emphasized his powerful build. The way his eyes widened slightly when he saw her sent an unexpected flutter through her stomach. "You look beautiful," he said, and for once, his tone held no careful distance or professional courtesy. He sounded genuinely impressed. "Thank you," Isabella replied, accepting his offered arm. "You clean up pretty well yourself." The gala was everything Isabella had been trained to expect: glittering chandeliers, champagne flowing freely, a string quartet providing elegant background music. She recognized faces from the folders Vince had made her study: the Carbone family's patriarch, aging but still commanding respect, the Russo brothers who controlled the docks, and of course Marco Salvatore, who watched their entrance with eyes like a hawk spotting prey. Dante guided her through the crowd with easy confidence, introducing her to business associates and family friends, his hand never leaving her waist. Isabella played her part perfectly, smiling and making small talk about wedding plans, their first meeting at her café, how wonderful Maria had been in welcoming her to the family. She felt Marco's eyes on her throughout the evening, analyzing every gesture, every word, looking for the crack in their facade. The confrontation came midway through the evening, when Isabella excused herself to get some air in the hotel's formal gardens. She'd needed a moment to breathe, to step out of the role and remember who she really was beneath the designer dress and borrowed jewelry. The garden was beautiful in the twilight, strung with fairy lights and fragrant with jasmine. She was admiring a particularly beautiful rose bush when a voice behind her made her blood run cold. "Lovely evening, isn't it?" Isabella turned to find Marco Salvatore approaching, 2 of his men flanking him at a careful distance. In the shadows of the garden, away from the party's civilized atmosphere, Marco looked every inch the predator he was. "It is," Isabella agreed, keeping her voice pleasant despite her racing heart. "The auction for the children's hospital has been very successful." "Yes, very charitable of everyone," Marco said dismissively. "Tell me, Isabella, how is wedding planning going? I imagine it must be difficult, planning a wedding to a man whose first priority will always be the family business." "Actually, Dante's been very involved," Isabella replied, remembering V's coaching about answering personal questions. "He has very specific ideas about flowers." Marco laughed, but the sound was devoid of humor. "Does he? How interesting. And your café, I heard it was struggling before you met Dante. How fortunate that a successful businessman fell in love with you just when you needed financial help the most." The implication was clear, and Isabella felt her temper stir. She thought of her mother, who had taught her to face bullies with confidence, not fear. "Are you suggesting I'm with Dante for his money, Mr. Salvatore? Because I assure you, if I wanted to marry for money, I could have done so long before I met him. I'm with Dante because I love him, because he's a good man who's trying to build something better for his family. If that's difficult for you to understand, perhaps it says more about your own relationships than mine." Marco's expression darkened, and he stepped closer, his men moving with him. Isabella suddenly realized how isolated they were, how far from the safety of the ballroom and Dante's protection. "Careful, little girl. You're playing in a world you don't understand. Dante thinks he can change the old ways, make us all legitimate businessmen, but some of us remember what this family really is. We're not men who go soft for a pretty face and a sad story about a café. Maybe that's why you'll never be more than what you are now, Isabella heard herself say, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Dante's building a future. You're just clinging to the past. For a moment Isabella thought she'd gone too far. Marco's face flushed with anger, and his hand moved toward his jacket in a gesture that made his men tense. But before the situation could escalate, another voice cut through the tension like a blade. There you are, amore. I've been looking for you. Dante emerged from the shadows with Vincent at his side, and the relief that flooded through Isabella was almost dizzying. But more than relief, she felt a fierce protectiveness emanate from Dante as he took in the scene. Marco standing too close, his men positioned threateningly, Isabella backed up against the garden wall. Marco, Dante said, his voice dangerously soft as he moved to Isabella's side, placing himself slightly between her and the other man. Is there a problem? No problem, Marco said, but his eyes held a promise of future confrontation. Just getting to know your fiancée better. She's quite spirited. I can see why you're smitten. Yes, well, Isabella has never been one to back down from a challenge, Dante replied, his arms sliding around her waist in a gesture that was both possessive and protective. It's one of the things I love about her. Now, if you'll excuse us, we're supposed to be leading the first dance. As they walked back toward the ballroom, Dante's hand tight on her waist, Isabella could feel the tension radiating from him. Once they were out of earshot of Marco and his men, Dante leaned in close, his breath warm against her ear. What were you thinking, confronting him alone? Do you have any idea what could have happened? I didn't plan to confront him, Isabella whispered back, smiling for the benefit of anyone watching. He followed me out here. And I wasn't going to let him intimidate me or question our relationship without defending it. You could have been hurt, Dante said, and there was something in his voice that went beyond professional concern for his business arrangement. Promise me you won't let yourself be isolated like that again. If someone wants to talk to you privately, you tell them no or you make sure Vince or one of the guards is nearby. Marco is dangerous, Isabella. This isn't a game. I know it's not a game, Isabella replied, some of her own tension bleeding into her voice. I've spent 6 weeks studying your world, learning your family's history, preparing for exactly these kinds of confrontations. You wanted me to be convincing? Well, convincing means defending our relationship when it's challenged, not running away the moment someone questions it. They had reached the ballroom, and the orchestra was indeed beginning to play for the first dance. Dante led her onto the floor with practiced ease, pulling her into his arms with a gentleness that contradicted the frustration in his eyes. As they began to move to the music, he said quietly, "You're right. You did exactly what a real fiancé would do. It's just..." "What?" Isabella prompted when he didn't finish. "I didn't expect to actually worry about you," Dante admitted, his dark eyes meeting hers with startling honesty. "This was supposed to be a business arrangement, but when I saw you cornered by Marco, when I thought about what he might do, it wasn't concern for the arrangement I felt. It was concern for you." Isabella's breath caught as they moved together across the dance floor, the rest of the room fading into insignificance. "Dante." "I know," he said quickly. "I know this is just temporary, just 6 months. But I need you to understand something, Isabella. While you're playing this role, while you're using my name and living in my house, you're under my protection. Not because you're an asset or a convenient fiction, but because you matter. To my mother, to this family, and..." He stopped himself, seeming to realize he was saying too much. "Just promise me you'll be more careful." "I promise," Isabella whispered, and as they continued to dance, she realized the wall Dante had so carefully maintained between them had developed its first crack. The weeks that followed the gala brought changes Isabella hadn't anticipated. Dante began spending more time in her wing of the mansion, ostensibly to discuss upcoming events or coordinate their stories, but the conversations gradually became more personal. They talked about her café, about his vision for legitimizing the family business, about books they'd both read and places they wanted to travel. Maria's surgery was scheduled and successfully completed, and Isabella spent hours at the hospital with Dante, watching him transform from the intimidating Mafia boss into a worried son who held his mother's hand through her recovery. It was during one of those long hospital nights that things shifted between them irreversibly. Maria was sleeping peacefully, the surgery having gone better than expected, and Isabella and Dante sat in the waiting room, exhausted but relieved. The hospital was quiet in the early morning hours, and they were alone except for the distant sounds of nurses making rounds. "Thank you," Dante said quietly, his eyes on his sleeping mother visible through the window. "For being here. You didn't have to be," This wasn't part of our agreement. Yes, it was, Isabella replied. I agreed to help keep your mother's stress down and support her recovery. That includes being here when she's scared and needs family around her. But you're not really family, Dante said, though his tone suggested he was testing the truth of that statement rather than asserting it. This is all pretend, remember? 6 months, then we go our separate ways. Isabella was quiet for a long moment, gathering the courage to voice what had been growing in her heart over the past weeks. What if I don't want it to be pretend anymore? Dante's head turned sharply, his dark eyes searching her face. What are you saying? I'm saying that somewhere between memorizing your family tree and learning to navigate your world, between charity galas and hospital waiting rooms, this stopped being just a role I was playing. Isabella's heart pounded as she spoke, but she forced herself to continue. I'm saying that when Marco cornered me in that garden, I wasn't defending a fake relationship. I was defending something that had become real to me. I'm saying that I've fallen for you, Dante Moretti, and I don't know how to pretend anymore. The silence that followed felt eternal. Dante stood abruptly, pacing to the window, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. You don't know what you're saying. You don't really know me, Isabella. You know the man I've let you see, but there's darkness in me, violence, decisions I've made that would horrify you if you knew the details. I've killed people. I've destroyed lives. I'm trying to build something better, yes, but I can't erase what I've done or what I'm capable of. I'm not asking you to be someone you're not, Isabella said, rising to face him. I know who you are, Dante. I've seen how you protect your family, how you treat your mother, how you're trying to change a legacy you inherited. Yes, you're dangerous. Yes, your world is violent and morally complicated. But you're also the man who makes sure I have fresh flowers in my room every week because you noticed I like them. You're the man who spent 3 hours teaching me about wine pairings because we were attending a dinner and you didn't want me to feel out of place. You're the man who checks on me every night before bed, even though our agreement doesn't require it, just to make sure I'm safe and comfortable. That's who you really are. Dante turned to face her, and the raw emotion in his expression took her breath away. I push you away because I'm terrified of exactly this, of you seeing something in me worth caring about and then getting hurt because of it. My world doesn't allow for soft things, Isabella. People I care about become targets. Then teach me to be less of a target, Isabella challenged, closing the distance between them. Teach me to protect myself better. But don't push me away because you're afraid. I'm afraid too. I'm terrified of what I'm feeling, of what happens when 6 months is up, of loving someone whose life is constantly in danger. But I'd rather be afraid and honest than safe and pretending. Isabella? Dante's voice was barely a whisper as he reached up, his hand cupping her cheek with infinite gentleness. If we do this, if we make this real, there's no going back. You'll truly be part of this world, with all the danger and complications that entails. Are you really ready for that? Instead of answering with words, Isabella rose on her toes and kissed him. It was gentle at first, tentative, a question more than a demand. But then Dante's arms came around her, pulling her close as he deepened the kiss with a passion that spoke of weeks of restraint finally breaking. It was nothing like the kiss they'd shared at the gala for Marco's benefit, that had been performance. This was real, raw, honest in a way that made Isabella's entire body come alive. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Dante rested his forehead against hers. 6 months, he said, but now the words held a different meaning. That's how long ago I stopped thinking of you as a convenient fiction and started thinking of you as someone I couldn't imagine my life without. The remainder of Isabella's contracted 6 months passed in a blur of deepening emotion and growing danger. With their relationship now genuine, the dynamics shifted. Dante still maintained security protocols, but now his protectiveness stemmed from love rather than obligation. Isabella still attended family events and social functions, but now she truly was becoming a part of the Moretti family rather than just playing the role. Vincent, predictably, had concerns. You're both making this too real, he warned Dante during a meeting Isabella accidentally overheard. Feelings make you vulnerable. If Marco or any of the other families figure out that Isabella isn't just a convenient fiancée but someone you actually love, they'll use that against you. Let them try, Dante had replied with quiet menace. Anyone who threatens Isabella answers to me directly. But Vincent's warnings proved prophetic. 3 months after Isabella and Dante had made their relationship genuine, Marco made his move. It started with small things, suspicious cars following Isabella when she visited her café, which she still operated with Sophia's help. Then came the more direct messages, flowers delivered with threatening notes, photographs of Isabella taken from a distance, Clear evidence that someone was watching her every move. Dante increased security, keeping Isabella close, but they both knew Marco was working up to something bigger. The confrontation came on a Tuesday evening when Isabella had convinced Dante to let her make a quick stop at the café to check on some supply orders. She had Vince and 2 guards with her and it should have been safe. But Marco had planned carefully. The attack came fast, a van blocking their car, armed men overwhelming the guards before they could react effectively, and Isabella being pulled from the vehicle and thrown into the van before Vince could reach her. The last thing she saw before a hood was pulled over her head was Vince's furious face and the knowledge that Dante was going to lose his mind when he found out. She was taken to what she later learned was one of Marco's warehouses on the docks, tied to a chair in a cold, dark room. When the hood was finally removed, Marco stood before her, looking pleased with himself. "Nothing personal, Isabella," he said almost conversationally. "Well, actually, it is quite personal. You see, you've become a problem. Not because you're some innocent cafe owner playing dress-up in the Mafia. I figured that out weeks ago and honestly I respect the hustle. No, you're a problem because Dante actually fell for you. His genuine feelings for you make him weak, make him vulnerable, and that's something I can exploit." "He'll come for me," Isabella said, keeping her voice steady despite her fear. "And when he does, you'll regret this." "Oh, I'm counting on him coming," Marco replied. "In fact, I've already sent him the address. But here's the thing. When Dante arrives ready to trade anything to get you back safely, he's going to walk into a trap. My men will be waiting, and I'll finally remove the obstacle that's been preventing real progress in this organization. With Dante gone, the Moretti family will fall in line or fall apart, and either way I win." "You're going to kill him," Isabella said, horror washing over her. "I'm going to do what's necessary for the family's future," Marco corrected. "A future that doesn't include reformers and their idealistic plans for legitimacy. We're criminals, Isabella. We should act like it." Left alone in the dark warehouse, tied and helpless, Isabella's mind raced. She had to warn Dante somehow, had to let him know this was a trap. But how? Marco had taken her phone, and even if she could get free, she had no idea where she was or how to contact anyone. Then she remembered something Vince had taught her during one of their training sessions about the tracking devices sewn into all of her clothing as a precaution. At the time, it had seemed paranoid, but now Isabella had never been more grateful for Vincent Caruso's paranoia. Dante would know where she was. The question was whether he would recognize the trap before walking into it. The wait was agonizing. Hours passed, or maybe just minutes. Time became elastic in the darkness. Isabella could hear Marco's men moving around the warehouse, preparing for Dante's arrival, setting up what she imagined were perfect ambush positions. She struggled against her bonds, managing to loosen them slightly but not enough to actually escape. When she finally heard the sounds of fighting outside the warehouse, followed by gunfire, Isabella's heart nearly stopped. This was it. Dante had arrived and Marco's trap was springing. She heard men shouting, more gunshots, the crash of something heavy falling. Then the door to her room burst open. But it wasn't Dante who entered first. It was Vince, gun drawn, his expression terrifying in its cold fury. "You okay?" he asked, quickly cutting her bonds. "It's a trap," Isabella gasped as soon as her mouth was free. "Marco's using me to lure Dante into an ambush. His men are positioned throughout the warehouse." "We know," Vince said grimly. "We figured as much. That's why Dante brought everyone, and I mean everyone. Marco wanted a war, he's getting one." He led Isabella out of the room and what she saw made her blood run cold. The warehouse had become a battlefield. Moretti soldiers were engaged in fierce fighting with Marco's men throughout the space. And in the center of it all was Dante, moving with lethal grace as he fought his way toward where Isabella had been held. Their eyes met across the chaos, and the relief in Dante's expression was visible even from a distance. But that moment of distraction cost him. One of Marco's men landed a blow that sent Dante staggering. Isabella screamed his name, and Vince pushed her behind a stack of crates for cover as he moved to help his boss. What followed was brutal and efficient. The Moretti family had come in force, and despite Marco's planning, he hadn't counted on Dante's willingness to bring the full weight of family resources to bear. Within minutes, Marco's men were overwhelmed, surrendering or retreating. Marco himself tried to run but found himself cornered by Dante, Vince, and half a dozen Moretti soldiers. "It's over, Marco," Dante said, his voice colder than Isabella had ever heard it. "You threatened my family, kidnapped my fiancée and tried to start a war. The other families won't back you on this. You went too far." Marco's face was defiant even in defeat. "You think this changes anything? You're still weak, Dante. Still trying to play by rules that don't exist in our world. You're wrong, Dante replied. I'm not weak. I'm strong enough to build something better than what you represent. But I'm also still enough of what you are to know what has to happen now. Isabella watched from her protected position as Dante made a decision. She couldn't hear what was said next, but she saw Marco's expression change from defiance to fear. And she understood in that moment exactly what Dante had meant when he'd warned her about the darkness in him, the violence he was capable of. This was his world, where mercy was weakness and consequences were final. When it was over, Dante came to her, his hands gentle despite the violence they'd just enacted. Are you hurt? He asked, his eyes searching her face for injuries. I'm okay, Isabella assured him even though she was shaking. Scared but okay. Dante pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. I'm sorry, he whispered into her hair. I'm so sorry you had to see that, had to be part of this. Vince was right, my feelings for you made you a target. Maybe I should have. Don't, Isabella interrupted, pulling back to look him in the eye. Don't you dare say you should have kept your distance or ended things. What happened tonight wasn't because you loved me, it was because Marco is a violent criminal who would have found some other way to come after you regardless. The difference is that this time I was worth fighting for, worth bringing every resource you had to protect. That matters, Dante. In the weeks following Marco's attack and subsequent removal from power, Isabella and Dante's relationship deepened further. The danger had forced them both to confront the reality of their situation. This wasn't a temporary arrangement or a convenient fiction anymore. This was real love, complicated and dangerous, but more genuine than anything either of them had experienced before. Dante officially proposed 3 months later, this time with no pretense, no contract, no 6-month expiration date. Just a man asking the woman he loved to spend her life with him, to truly become part of his family, to stand beside him as he continued working to transform the Moretti legacy. Isabella said yes without hesitation. Maria was overjoyed, her recovery complete and her health better than it had been in years. I knew from the moment I saw you in that tea room, she told Isabella during the wedding planning. I knew you were exactly who my son needed, even if I had to manufacture a reason to bring you together. You manipulative woman, Isabella said with affection. You planned all of this from the beginning, didn't you? Maria's smile was serene and completely unrepentant. A mother knows what her son needs, even when he doesn't know it himself. Besides, you needed us too, even if you didn't realize it. Your café, your loneliness, your need for family, we gave you all of that. And she was right, Isabella realized. She had saved her mother's café, yes, but she'd gained so much more. A family, a purpose, a love that had transformed her life completely. The transformation was mutual. Dante accelerated his plans to legitimize the Moretti operations, using Isabella's outsider perspective to identify opportunities and connections he might have missed. Together, they built bridges between the criminal world he was leaving behind and the legitimate business empire he was creating. It wasn't easy and there were setbacks and dangers, but they faced them together. As Isabella stood in her beautiful bedroom in the Moretti mansion on the night before her wedding, a real wedding this time, not a pretense, she reflected on everything that had brought her to this moment. A chance encounter in a tea room, an elderly woman's desperate plea, a 6-month contract that was supposed to be purely transactional. All of it had led here, to a love that had been tested by danger and proven genuine through adversity. Tomorrow she would walk down the aisle and become Isabella Moretti in truth, not just in pretense. She would pledge her life to a man who had shown her both his darkness and his light, who had protected her, loved her, and chosen to build a better future with her at his side. And she would mean every word of her vows. The pretense was over. The real story was just beginning. The wedding of Isabella Romano and Dante Moretti was everything Maria had dreamed of and more. The ceremony took place in the gardens of the Moretti estate on a perfect Saturday afternoon in late spring, with the roses in full bloom and the scent of jasmine perfuming the air. 200 guests filled the white chairs arranged in careful rows, representing both the legitimate business world Dante was building and the carefully selected members of the families he still maintained relationships with. Isabella had chosen simplicity over ostentation for her dress, a classic A-line gown in ivory silk, with delicate lace at the bodice and sleeves, elegant without being ostentatious. Her auburn hair was swept up in a graceful twist, with small white roses tucked into the arrangement. As she walked down the aisle on Vincent Caruso's arm, Vince having become like a protective uncle to her over the past year, she had eyes only for Dante. He stood at the altar in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, looking every inch the powerful man he was, but the expression on his face as he watched her approach was pure vulnerability. This was a man who commanded respect and fear from dangerous people, but right now, he looked like any groom watching his bride walk toward him, awed, grateful, and completely in love. The ceremony was traditional, blending Italian Catholic customs with personal touches that made it uniquely theirs. When Dante slipped the wedding band onto Isabella's finger, his hands were steady, but his voice was thick with emotion as he said his vows. Isabella, 1 year ago you walked into my life by accident and changed everything. You showed me that strength isn't just about power and control, it's about opening your heart even when it's terrifying, about building something good even when the world expects otherwise. You've made me want to be a better man, to create a legacy I can be proud of, to build a future worth living. I promise to protect you, to cherish you, to stand beside you through whatever challenges come. You are my partner, my love, my home. Today and always. Isabella's own vows were equally heartfelt, her voice clear and strong despite the tears in her eyes. Dante, you once warned me that you weren't a good man, that there was darkness in you I might not be able to accept. But you were wrong. You are a good man trying to navigate an impossible situation, making difficult choices to protect the people you love. You've shown me a world I never knew existed, taught me strength I didn't know I had, and loved me with an honesty that takes my breath away. I promise to stand beside you, to be your partner in building the future you envision, to love you through the darkness and the light. You are my heart, my home, my forever. When the priest finally pronounced them husband and wife, Dante's kiss was gentle and reverent, a promise of all the kisses to come. The reception that followed was a celebration that bridged worlds, legitimate businesspeople mixing with reformed criminals, old family friends dancing alongside new allies, all united in celebrating the couple who had somehow made an impossible situation work. Maria gave a toast that had everyone laughing and crying in equal measure, recounting the story of how she'd accidentally brought Isabella into Dante's life, conveniently leaving out the parts about fake engagements and business arrangements. Sometimes, she concluded, raising her glass high, fate needs a little push. I'm just glad I was there to provide it. To Isabella and Dante, may your love continue to transform not just yourselves, but the world around you. Sophia Chin, Isabella's best friend and the maid of honor, gave her own toast that was characteristically direct. When Isabella told me she was pretending to be engaged to a mafia boss to save her café, I thought she'd lost her mind. When she told me she'd actually fallen in love with him, I was sure she was crazy. But watching them together, seeing how Dante looks at her like she's his entire world, and how Isabella has somehow managed to civilize one of the city's most dangerous men with nothing but kindness and stubbornness, well, I guess crazy worked out pretty well. To the couple who proved that sometimes the most unlikely love stories are the ones that last forever. The reception lasted well into the night, with dancing and music and celebration that felt endless. But eventually, Isabella and Dante slipped away from their own party, stealing a few moments alone in the quiet of the rose garden where they'd first shared a real, unguarded conversation months before. "Hello, Mrs. Moretti," Dante said softly, pulling Isabella close as they stood under the stars. "How does it feel to be officially part of the family?" "Like coming home," Isabella replied honestly. "Like everything that happened, all the fear and danger and uncertainty, led me exactly where I was supposed to be." Dante kissed her forehead gently. "I have something for you. I was going to wait, but this moment feels right." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "This isn't more jewelry, you have enough of that. This is something different." Isabella opened the box to find a set of keys and a deed. Confused, she looked up at Dante. "What is this?" "The building your cafe is in," Dante explained, his eyes warm. "I bought it from your landlord 6 months ago. You now own the entire property outright. No rent, no landlord, no one who can ever threaten your mother's dream again. And the keys are to the empty storefront next door. I thought maybe you'd want to expand, turn Romano's cafe into something bigger. Not because you need to, but because you can if you want to." Isabella's eyes filled with tears. "Dante, this is too much." "It's not nearly enough," he interrupted gently. "You gave up so much to be with me, Isabella. Your independence, your anonymity, your safety. The least I can do is make sure your dreams have room to grow. Besides, I have selfish motives. When we have children someday, I want them to see what their mother built, to understand that strength comes in many forms." "Children," Isabella repeated, the words settling into her heart with warmth. "You want children? With you?" "At least 3 or 4, Dante said with a smile. "Though fair warning, if they inherit your stubbornness combined with my protective instincts, we're going to have very challenging teenagers." They laughed together, and in that moment, Isabella could see their future unfurling before them. Children running through these gardens, family dinners around Maria's table, the slow transformation of the Moretti legacy from something dark into something hopeful. It wouldn't be easy and there would still be dangers and challenges, but they would face them together. The first year of their marriage was a study in balance and growth. Isabella divided her time between managing her café, which she did expand into the neighboring space, creating a full restaurant that quickly became one of the city's most popular dining destinations, and her duties as a Moretti wife. She joined the boards of several charities, using her position to direct resources toward causes she cared about: children's literacy programs, support for small businesses, and assistance for families affected by violence. Dante, true to his word, accelerated the legitimization of Moretti operations. With Isabella's support and perspective, he successfully transitioned the family's remaining questionable enterprises into legal businesses, negotiating exits from old arrangements and building new partnerships with legitimate corporations. It wasn't a complete transformation overnight. Some connections to the past remained, some old debts of honor still had to be paid, but the trajectory was clear. The Moretti family was becoming what Dante had always envisioned: a legitimate business empire with a complicated past but a clean future. Vincent remained skeptical of some changes but grudgingly admitted that Isabella had been good for both Dante and the family. "You civilized him without making him weak," Vince told Isabella during one of their now regular coffee meetings. "That's a hell of a trick. Most women either accept the violence and become part of it, or they try to change everything and destroy what makes their man who he is. You found the balance." "I didn't change him," Isabella corrected. "I just helped him become who he already wanted to be. The man I fell in love with was always there, he just needed someone to believe in his vision and support it." Maria's health remained stable, and she threw herself into grandmother-in-waiting mode with enthusiasm that sometimes bordered on overwhelming. Every family dinner included not-so-subtle hints about babies, nursery decorating, and the importance of continuing the family line. Dante would roll his eyes affectionately, but Isabella could see he wanted children just as much as his mother wanted grandchildren. The decision to try for a family came naturally, about 18 months into their marriage. They had achieved a level of stability and security that made parenthood feel possible rather than reckless. The night Isabella took the pregnancy test and saw the positive result, her hands shook as she went to find Dante in his study. He looked up from the financial reports he'd been reviewing, immediately sensing something significant in her expression. "What is it? What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," Isabella said, her voice breaking with emotion as she crossed the room to him. "Everything's perfect actually. Dante, I'm pregnant." The transformation in his expression was instantaneous. Shock giving way to joy, giving way to something that looked almost like fear. "Pregnant," he repeated, rising from his chair and crossing to her in 2 long strides. His hands came up to cup her face, his eyes searching hers. "You're sure? You're really sure?" "I took 3 tests," Isabella said, laughing through her tears. "All positive. We're having a baby." Dante pulled her into his arms, holding her with a gentleness that spoke of the precious cargo she now carried. When he pulled back, there were tears in his eyes. "I'm going to be a father," he said wonderingly. "We're going to have a child." "Isabella, His voice broke and he had to pause to collect himself. I promise our child, I will give them a better world than the one I inherited. A safer world, a cleaner world. They'll never have to carry the weight I've carried. They'll have something even better," Isabella said softly. "They'll have you as a father. A man who knows both darkness and light, who understands the importance of protecting family, who's strong enough to change his world for the people he loves. They'll have the best of you, Dante. And they'll have us together." The pregnancy was announced to the family at the next Sunday dinner, and Maria's reaction was everything they could have hoped for. She wept with joy, immediately launching into plans for nurseries and baby showers and all the traditions that would welcome the new Moretti into the world. Vincent, characteristically, went into protection mode, immediately increasing security protocols and making plans for medical emergencies and safe transport. As Isabella's pregnancy progressed, she found herself falling even more deeply in love with her husband. Dante was attentive without being smothering, excited without being overbearing, and his protectiveness reached new heights when it came to her health and comfort. He read pregnancy books, attended every doctor's appointment, and was constantly adjusting things in the house to make them safer for their coming child. When they found out at the 20-week ultrasound that Isabella was carrying twins, a boy and a girl, the joy was tempered with the realization that their family was about to get twice as complicated and twice as wonderful in one moment. Twins, Dante had said, staring at the ultrasound images in wonder. We're having twins. Isabella, are you okay with this? Is this safe? Their doctor had laughed at his concern. Twins are more work, but Isabella is healthy and strong. Everything looks perfect. You're just going to need twice as many cribs. The remainder of the pregnancy passed in a blur of preparation. The nursery was designed and redesigned 3 times before Isabella put her foot down and declared it perfect. 2 cribs were installed, along with changing tables, rocking chairs, and enough baby clothes to dress a small army. Maria was in her element, knitting tiny blankets and buying every baby item that caught her eye. Isabella continued working at her restaurant until her 7th month, when Dante and Sofia staged a joint intervention and insisted she take maternity leave. You can run the business from home, Sofia said firmly. I've got the restaurant handled. You focus on growing those babies and not going into premature labor because you insisted on doing inventory while 8 months pregnant with twins. The twins arrived 2 weeks early on a snowy January morning, and the labor was intense but mercifully uncomplicated. Dante stayed by Isabella's side through every contraction, every push, every terrifying and beautiful moment. When the first cry filled the delivery room, their son weighing 6 pounds even, Dante's tears matched Isabella's. Their daughter followed 7 minutes later, slightly smaller at 5 pounds 12 ounces, but with a voice that suggested she would more than hold her own against her brother. The nurses placed both babies in Isabella's arms, and the feeling of holding her children for the first time was so overwhelming that for a moment, Isabella couldn't breathe. We did this, she whispered to Dante, who was staring at their children with an expression of absolute wonder. We created these perfect little people. You did this, Dante corrected, kissing her forehead. You carried them, you brought them into the world. I just got to watch the strongest woman I've ever known become even stronger. They named their son Antonio Dante Moretti, after Dante's late father and carrying on his own name. Their daughter became Grace Maria Moretti, honoring both Isabella's mother and Dante's. When Maria was finally allowed into the recovery room and saw her grandchildren for the first time, her tears of joy seemed endless. 2 perfect babies, Maria said, holding Antonio with the expertise of a woman who had raised her own child and lost her husband too young. 2 chances to make the world better. They're beautiful, mi bambini. Absolutely beautiful. The early months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Twins meant double the feeding, double the diaper changes, double the sleepless nights, but also double the smiles, double the tiny hands reaching for their parents, double the love that filled the Moretti household. Dante proved to be a devoted father, splitting night duty with Isabella, learning to change diapers and mix bottles with the same efficiency he brought to business negotiations. More than once, Isabella would wake in the middle of the night to find him in the nursery, a baby in each arm, talking softly to them about everything and nothing. I'm telling them about their grandfather, Dante explained one night when Isabella found him doing exactly this. About the good man he was before the business consumed him. About the mistakes I won't repeat, the legacy I'm changing for them. I want them to know that while they come from a complicated past, their future can be anything they want it to be. As the twins grew from newborns to infants to toddlers, they developed distinct personalities that both delighted and challenged their parents. Antonio was thoughtful and observant, content to watch the world with his father's dark eyes, taking everything in before making his move. Grace was bold and fearless, already climbing everything she could reach and demanding attention with a force of personality that reminded everyone of her grandmother. You realize we're in trouble, right? Isabella said to Dante one evening when they'd finally gotten both children down for the night. Grace had fought sleep for an hour, insisting she wasn't tired even as she could barely keep her eyes open. Grace has your stubbornness and my mother's independent streak. And Antonio has your strategic mind and my tendency to overthink everything. We've created children who are going to outsmart us before they're 5. Dante pulled her close, laughing softly. Good. I want them to be smarter than us, stronger than us, better than us. That's what every parent should want for their children, to exceed everything they were. By the time the twins turned 3, the transformation of the Moretti family was complete. Dante's legitimate business empire was thriving, real estate developments, technology investments, and import-export operations that had nothing to do with crime and everything to do with smart business decisions. The last of the family's questionable enterprises had been sold off or shut down, and while some old connections remained for networking and respect, the Morettis were now known more for their philanthropy and business acumen than their criminal past. Isabella's restaurant had expanded into a small chain of 4 locations, each maintaining the intimate, welcoming atmosphere of the original but reaching more communities. She'd also published a cookbook that combined her mother's traditional recipes with her own innovations, with all proceeds going to literacy programs. She'd found a way to honor her mother's memory while building her own legacy. Maria remained healthy and active, dividing her time between spoiling her grandchildren and working with various charitable organizations. She'd become something of a society matron, using her position to direct resources toward causes she believed in, and while everyone knew the Moretti family's history, Maria's grace and dignity had made them respectable in ways that would have seemed impossible years before. Vincent had officially retired from active security work, though he remained a trusted advisor to Dante and had become Antonio's unofficial godfather and protector. Someone needs to teach the boy how to handle himself, Vince had grumbled when Dante officially asked him to take on the role. Can't have him growing up soft just because his parents went legitimate. 5 years after their wedding, Isabella and Dante found themselves back at the Grand Palazzo Hotel, sitting at the very table where their story had begun. Maria had suggested they meet her there for afternoon tea, claiming she wanted to reminisce. The twins were with their grandmother back at the estate, probably being fed far too much sugar despite Isabella's dietary guidelines. As they sat together, Dante's hand covering Isabella's on the white tablecloth, they reflected on everything that had brought them to this moment. The chance encounter, the desperate plea, the business arrangement that became something real. The danger, the love, the transformation of 2 lives and an entire family legacy. Do you ever regret it? Dante asked quietly. Agreeing to that first 6-month arrangement? If you'd known everything that would come, the danger, Marco, the complete upheaval of your normal life, would you still have said yes? Isabella thought about her answer carefully, looking around the elegant tea room that had been the setting for the beginning of her greatest adventure. If I'd known everything that would happen, I probably would have been too scared to agree, she admitted. But I'm so grateful I didn't know. I'm grateful I made the choice based on helping a sick woman and saving my café, not knowing that I was actually choosing the great love of my life. Because if I'd known, if I'd understood how deeply I would fall in love with you, how completely my life would change, how much joy and terror and love would come from that decision, I might have talked myself out of it. Sometimes the best decisions are the ones we make without fully understanding their consequences. I promised myself I wouldn't fall in love with you, Dante confessed. That first night, when we agreed to the arrangement, I told myself it was purely business. That I could maintain distance, protect my heart, keep things professional. I lasted about 3 weeks before I knew I was in serious trouble. 3 weeks. Isabella laughed. I made it almost 6 before I admitted to myself what I was feeling. Though looking back, I think I started falling for you the first time I saw you with your mother, when you stopped being the intimidating mafia boss and became just a worried son. That's when I saw who you really were underneath everything else. Their reflection was interrupted by Maria's arrival, looking elegant in a cream suit, her face glowing with happiness. She settled into her chair with a satisfied sigh, looking between Isabella and Dante with obvious pleasure. Thank you both for meeting me here, she said, gesturing for the server to bring tea. This place holds such special meaning for our family. It's where everything began. Where you manipulated everything to begin, Isabella corrected fondly. Admit it, Maria. You planned that whole encounter. Maria's smile was serene and completely unrepentant. A mother does what she must to protect her son and secure his happiness. Yes, I exaggerated my dizzy spell. Yes, I pushed you together in a moment of crisis. But I didn't create the love between you. That was genuine from the start, even if you both were too stubborn to see it immediately. You could have just introduced us like a normal person, Dante pointed out. Where's the romance in that? Maria laughed. Besides, you never would have given Isabella a chance if I'd just arranged a dinner introduction. You would have been polite, distant, convinced that no one could understand your world or accept what you were trying to build. You needed to see her strength, her compassion, her ability to think on her feet. The crisis revealed her true character in a way a normal introduction never could. Isabella had to admit Maria had a point. If they'd met at some family dinner or social event, Dante probably would have been cordial but distant, and she would have been intimidated by his reputation and world. The unusual circumstances of their first meeting had forced them past those initial barriers, creating a connection that might not have formed otherwise. As they sat together in the afternoon sun, sipping tea and talking about the twins' latest adventures, Isabella felt a profound sense of gratitude for every twist and turn that had brought her to this moment. Yes, there had been danger. Yes, there had been fear and uncertainty in moments when she'd questioned everything. But there had also been love, deep, transformative love that had changed her life completely. The restaurant called with a question about the evening menu, Dante's phone buzzed with a business matter that needed his attention, and Maria started discussing plans for the twins' upcoming birthday party. Normal life, family life, the beautiful mundane details of building a future together. As they prepared to leave, Dante pulled Isabella close for a moment, whispering in her ear so only she could hear. "Thank you for pretending that day. But thank you more for making it real." Isabella smiled, thinking of the twins waiting at home, of the life they'd built together, of the love that had grown from a 6-month arrangement into forever. "Best business decision I ever made," she whispered back. They left the hotel hand in hand, Maria walking beside them, 3 people who had started as strangers and become family through an unlikely series of events. Behind them, the tea room returned to its elegant calm, unaware that it had been the setting for a love story that had transformed lives and legacies. And somewhere in that beautiful old room, if you listen carefully, you might still hear the echo of an elderly woman's whispered plea, "Pretend you're my son's fiancée." 3 simple words that had changed everything. Isabella stood in the doorway of what had once been her office in the original Romano's café and surveyed the space that now served as the headquarters for her restaurant group and charitable foundation. At 38, she had accomplished more than she'd ever dreamed possible as that 28-year-old café owner who'd been struggling to make rent. 10 locations across the city, a successful cookbook series, partnerships with culinary schools to train disadvantaged youth, and a foundation that supported small business owners facing the same challenges she once had. Her mother would have been proud. More importantly, Isabella was proud of what she'd built. The café itself remained her favorite location, still serving the same artisan coffee and homemade pastries that had started it all, still attracting the loyal customers who remembered when it was just Isabella behind the counter, pouring her heart into every cup. She heard the bell above the door chime and turned to see Dante enter, now 42 and somehow even more handsome than the day they'd met. Gray streaked his dark hair at the temples, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, but he moved with the same confident grace, and his eyes still lit up when he saw her. "Hello, beautiful," he said, crossing to kiss her. "Ready to go? The kids are going to be impossible if we're late to their recital." The twins were 8 now, Antonio studying piano with serious dedication while Grace had insisted on learning drums, to everyone's initial horror and eventual acceptance. They were both brilliant, challenging, loving children who kept their parents on their toes and made every day an adventure. "I'm ready," Isabella confirmed, grabbing her coat. "Though I still can't believe Grace talked her music teacher into letting her perform a drum solo at a piano recital." "She has your powers of persuasion," Dante said with a grin. "And my complete disregard for convention when it serves our purposes." They were halfway to the car when Isabella's phone rang. The caller ID made her smile. Sophia, her best friend and now the COO of Romano's restaurant group, calling from the flagship location. "Tell me Grace didn't already call you about adding chocolate lava cake to the children's menu," Isabella said in greeting. "Actually, that's not why I'm calling," Sophia replied, laughter in her voice. "Though we should discuss that suggestion because it's actually not terrible. No, I'm calling because a young woman just came in, early 20s, looks terrified and determined in equal measure. She says she's 3 months behind on rent for her bakery, her landlord is threatening eviction, and she heard you sometimes help small business owners. I think you're going to want to meet her." Isabella looked at Dante, who had clearly heard enough of the conversation to understand. He raised an eyebrow in question and she knew he was thinking the same thing she was. How many times could one life come full circle? "Tell her I'll meet with her tomorrow morning," Isabella said. "First thing. And Sophia? Make sure she has a good meal while she waits. She's probably too stressed to remember to eat properly." As they drove to the twins' recital, Dante reached over to take Isabella's hand. "You know you don't have to save every struggling business owner you meet, right? You've already done more than enough." "I'm not trying to save everyone," Isabella replied. "But when someone walks through my door asking for help, how can I turn them away? Someone took a chance on me when I needed it most. Actually, a whole family took a chance on me. The least I can do is pay that forward. Just as long as you're not planning to engage them to one of the twins," Dante said dryly. "Maria's already making noises about arranging marriages, and I've had to remind her several times that our children are 8, not 18. Isabella laughed, remembering Maria's increasing hints about the twins' future spouses, her determination to see the Moretti line continue with appropriate matches. Some things never changed even as everything else transformed. That evening after the recital, where Antonio performed beautifully and Grace's drum solo brought down the house, the family gathered at the Moretti estate for Sunday dinner, a tradition Maria insisted on maintaining. The table was filled with family and close friends. Vincent, who regaled Antonio with dramatically exaggerated stories of his grandfather's business prowess, Sophia, who had become as much family as friend over the years, and several of Dante's business partners and their families. As Isabella looked around the table, watching her children laugh with their grandmother, seeing Dante in animated conversation with Vincent about Antonio's interest in the family business, the legitimate family business, she felt that same sense of profound gratitude that had become familiar over the years. This life, this family, this love, none of it had been in her plans 10 years ago when she'd sat alone in that tea room, worried about rent and wondering how to save her mother's dream. She'd thought the biggest decision of her life would be whether to accept help from a stranger to keep her café open for a few more months. Instead, she'd found a family, a purpose, a love that had transformed everything. She'd become a wife, a mother, a successful businesswoman, and a philanthropist. She'd helped change a criminal legacy into something honorable. She'd turned a 6-month arrangement into a forever that kept getting better. And tomorrow she'd meet with a young woman who needed help, who was probably terrified and desperate and hoping for a miracle. Isabella would listen to her story, assess her situation, and if the woman had the same determination and heart Isabella had seen in her own mirror years ago, she'd help. Because that's what you did when you'd been given a second chance. You paid it forward. As dinner wound down and Dante helped corral the twins toward bedtime, Maria caught Isabella's hand, her dark eyes warm with affection and satisfaction. "Happy, my dear?" she asked simply. "Incredibly," Isabella replied honestly. "Thank you, Maria. For everything. For that day in the tea room, for pushing us together, for believing we could build something real out of a pretense." "Thank you for saying yes," Maria countered. "For being brave enough to take a chance on an old woman's desperate plea. For loving my son and giving me grandchildren. For helping transform our family's legacy into something we can be proud of." She paused, then added with a mischievous smile, "I always did have excellent judgment about these things." Later that night, after the twins were finally asleep and the house had settled into quiet, Isabella and Dante stood together on the terrace overlooking the gardens, the same gardens where they'd had so many important conversations over the years. "Tomorrow, I'm meeting with that young woman Sophia called about," Isabella said, leaning against Dante's chest as his arms came around her. "The one with the struggling bakery." "I know," Dante replied. "I already had Vincent run a background check. She's legitimate, no red flags, just someone who took out too many loans to pursue a dream and got in over her head. Reminds me of someone else I know." "You had Vincent check her out?" Isabella turned to look up at him, touched and amused in equal measure. "Old habits," Dante said with a shrug. "I'll always protect what's mine, which now includes your charitable foundation and everyone you try to help through it. Besides, Vincent needs something to do in retirement besides teach Antonio questionable negotiating techniques." Isabella laughed, settling back against him. "I love you, you know. Even when you're being overprotective and running background checks on people who need business loans." "I love you too," Dante replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Every day more than the day before. You made me believe in possibility, in change, in the idea that people can be more than their past. You saved my family in ways you don't even realize." "We saved each other," Isabella corrected softly. "That's what love does. It transforms both people, makes them better than they were alone." They stood together under the stars, two people who had started as strangers playing roles and become partners, parents, and proof that sometimes the most unlikely love stories are the ones that last forever. Somewhere in the mansion, Antonio was probably already awake and reading by flashlight under his covers, his analytical mind unable to fully shut down even for sleep. Grace had likely kicked off all her blankets and was sprawled across her bed like a starfish, fearless even in dreams. Maria was in her suite, probably looking at pictures of her grandchildren and planning the next family gathering. This was home. This was family. This was the forever that had started with a whispered plea in a tea room and a woman kind enough to say yes to a stranger. And tomorrow, Isabella would extend that same kindness to someone else who needed it, continuing the cycle of helping and transformation that had changed her own life so completely. The pretense had ended years ago, but the love, the real, transformative, powerful love, that just kept growing, deepening, becoming more than either of them had imagined possible. They had built something beautiful from an impossible beginning. They had taken a 6-month arrangement and turned it into a lifetime. They had proven that sometimes the best stories are the ones that start with the simple question, "Will you help me?" And Isabella, looking back on everything they'd overcome and built together, knew she would answer that question the same way every time. Yes. Always yes.